we needed this time to breathe before we go into what will be two of the most spine-tingling, bone-crushing, amazing pieces of television in episode 7 and 8. Episode 6 was necessary. Hi, I'm Bobby. Welcome to Culture Kitsch. Just want to do some general housekeeping before we get into the review. Next week's episode, which is the review of episode 7, will be up on Tuesday. So, not that Monday, the 24th, it'll be up on the 25th of June, and then we'll kick back off going to Monday for the finale. I'm going out of town this week, so I won't be able to get the video up on Monday, but it will be up bright and early on Tuesday. I'll also put a little community note just in case. I feel like a teacher who's like leaving notes for my class before I go on vacation. Season 2, episode 5 of Interview with the Vampire, entitled Like the Light by Which God Made the World Before He Made Light, which is a beautiful title. So the episode opens with Daniel and Rashid on a little sushi date. Just kidding. No, Daniel is having dinner and Rashid, I guess, is his chaperone that Armand and Louis have tasked with watching wherever he goes. And they're having a conversation and Daniel's just like, how did I get the tapes? It was from an unmarked like postage. Like there's all of these parameters for me to be able to get mail. So how did you get the tapes to me? And Rashid is not really saying a ton, but then Rashid leaves to go to the bathroom. He's like, I gotta go to the bathroom. And in walks Raglan James, fake name, the guy from the Talamasca. He is having a conversation with Daniel. I think Daniel, asked him to come. And Daniel's basically like, how do I make it out of this thing alive? You might not. He said, we're not the best at keeping our assets alive. So you might die. Hope that's okay. And Daniel's like, well, I don't want that to happen. And Raglan, this is where Raglan says, like, you fear Armand, but you should fear the other one. And I feel like we've seen that little snippet in a lot of the like Nexons and things like that. And I think the initial reading was that he was talking about Louis. And he very well could be talking about Louis. But the fact that he didn't say a name leaves it open to interpretation. All of these things are very methodical and purposeful. That's what writing in television is. And so is he talking about Louis? Could he be talking about Lestat? Who knows? But either way, Daniel scared for his life. But he wants to get this book out. Like he wants this book. He wants the interview to be published because he knows that this would be a pretty big deal if he can accomplish it. Raglan is basically telling him like, hey, I will get you a publisher. And Daniel's like, I already have a publisher, but he's like, no, a better publisher that will actually get this book out in exchange for you doing some recon for us on the inside during this interview. So Daniel's like, what do I got to do? And Raglan's saying like, the Talamasca just wants you to ask a few hundred questions to kind of weave into the interview to give us some intel on these vampires. Then Rashid comes back and Raglan and Rashid interact, and the grand reveal is Rashid is an inside guy for the Talamasca. He's been a secret agent this entire time. Go Rashid. I've been rooting for Rashid since the show started, and real Rashid, hats off to you, brother, because you played the part well. So real Rashid is working for the Talamasca. He's in cahoots with the Talamasca and Raglan. So he's the guy on the inside, but they need a little bit more, and that's where Daniel comes in. So we got back to, now we're back in Paris. It feels like it's been a minute since we've been here because in episode 5, we didn't go to Paris at all. But we're back in Paris in the 40s, and Armand is allegedly doing what Louis told him to do. Now, mind you, Louis and Armand are in a real deal Holyfield Cold War. And you can tell that from just the framing and staging of them in this interview. They were on like a little love seat, basically all over each other. Now, distant. They are saving room for Jesus. That's how far apart those seats are. It's cold. It's icy. Louis pissed at Armand because of the events of episode 5 where he finds out that his memories were being tampered with by Armand. So when we go back to Paris in the 40s, Armand is kind of playing nice with a coven, and he thinks that he's playing nice with the coven. And Louis like, I didn't tell you to play nice with the coven. I just said to feed Santiago's ego back to him. You know, like Armand read it as like, oh, treat them with velvet gloves rather than being, you know, cold and demeaning. And Louis was like, you don't have to do all that. You just needed to feed Santiago's ego back to him and let that be that. They're really arguing semantics throughout this entire thing. Like Louis is not letting he's not letting his foot off of Armand's neck at all. Like he's that upset. So what they're doing now in the Théâtre des Vampires is they've got a new play that they're working on. And Santiago is basically rehearsing the play, but what's happening kind of internally is Santiago has sent out Celeste and Estelle to go to the Roger guy who we saw in episode 2, where Louis goes to talk to him, basically the banker that holds Lestat's like fortune. And so he sends Celeste and Estelle to go and talk to this guy to basically be like, when was the last time you talked to Lestat? Like, when was that correspondence? What, like, how did you do it? Like, all of this information. And it comes to a point where I couldn't explain if it was Celeste, if it was Santiago talking through Celeste, or if it was just at a point when Santiago was just able to, from way at the Théâtre des Vampires, basically three-way call into the Roger guy's mind, basically to get the information, like, verbatim pretty much. And he says, like, you know, the last time I talked to him was a wire was sent in the early 40s to New Orleans, Louisiana from Lestat. Like, that's basically the last time they talked. Clearly it's been a minute. And and so then Santiago's like, oh, you know, thank you, to the guy whose mind he just took over, I think, in that moment. And so they're really gathering evidence for this trial. If you remember in episode 4, the end of it, Santiago breaks into Louis and Claudia's apartment and gets Claudia's journals. So they've got that. And now they are getting whereabouts of Lestat to bring him in for the trial. Like, they are pounding the pavement for this trial that's going to take place in the ensuing episodes. So during all of this, Armand is just like, you know, I had no idea what was brewing around me, like all of this, like the coup that was staging. I had no idea that any of this was happening. And Daniel, very much so, not taking any of his crap. It's just like, you're powerful, you can read minds. How did you not know what was taking place around you? And Armand was like, I was in love. And Louis was like, bullshit. Like, oh, you were in love? And our mom was like, no, like, I was in love. Like, that's why I couldn't tell what was happening with the coven around me. They're conspiring to kill you. I had no idea. And here's the thing. I do believe that Armand was and is in love. But to say that he just had no idea what was happening, untrue. He absolutely knew what was a brewing, and we see that because of what happens later in the episode. He was just basically trying to figure out a way to make sure that he was good, you know. But to say that he just had no idea, or that maybe he figured something was happening, but he kind of shut off of his mind reading abilities, weird. Very weird. Daniel is kind of grilling him about this. Louis is kind of grilling him about this. And then Rashid is in the room, like, making drinks or whatever. And Armand basically is seeing how emboldened Daniel has gotten, because the past couple episodes, he's not been that way. So he's just like, Rashid, when y'all went out, like, did you leave Daniel alone anywhere? Like, basically trying to probe Rashid to be like, how is Daniel getting some of this extra information? Like, what has put a battery in his back now? Like, what happened? And Rashid is like, no, like, he had to go to the bathroom, but that was kind of it. And then Armand begins to reprimand Rashid, and it's just like, I told you not to leave him alone. And then Daniel comes in and corroborates Rashid's lie, and it's just like, oh, like, he was in the bathroom the whole time, like a creep, like, basically trying to get Armand off of their case that he talked to Raglan James, and it essentially is in talks with the Talamasca through this whole thing. So Armand is very much so suspicioso about what's taking place as of now. He doesn't quite know what is going on with Daniel and the Talamasca, but I think he's got a hunch. So then we get to the point where we've run out of Claudia's diaries to read. Like, Daniel gets to the end, and I think one of her last entries is just like, fuck these vampires, yada yada yodel. And so now they're going off of memories of Claudia. And one of the first memories that they're going off of is Claudia's friend, lover, future companion, Madeline. So we cut back to Paris. I'm going to put a general warning out there for mentions of sexual assault. So I'll put a little timestamp right here that you can jump to if you don't want to listen to that. It wasn't a very big part, but I just wanted to put a general warning out there. So we cut to Madeline's dress shop, and she's like just doing some stuff, and then she gets harassed by this same group of people who are harassing her for being a part of, I think was Horizontal Collaboration, I think is the name of it. And they're drawing, Yahtzee imagery on her window, and she's had enough of it. And they're just like, oh, if you would stop cleaning it off, like we would, stop doing it. Basically just being like, oh, you should keep it, like this is who you are. And she has enough, and she throws her iron through the window, shattering it and shattering the imagery that they were beginning to draw on her window yet again. And once she does that, they then come and trespass into her dress shop. And the two men then take Madeline back with the intention to assault her. And the woman is kind of just like, trashing her place, throwing her dresses all about and everything. And you see a light flicker in the background. So you know that someone is around, someone is about. And before they do anything to her, thank God, who busts in to save her woman? Claudia. Claudia is there, and she maims them all. And in that, she reveals to Madeline that she is a vampire. And that is technically a big no-no. I think it's rule number 2 of the vampire laws. Like, you're not supposed to reveal that you're a vampire to any human. Or I think maybe 4. It might be 4. But that's one of the laws. You're not supposed to reveal you're a vampire to any human. But she did it to save her from being hurt. And in that, Claudia is very gentle. Like, I'm not going to hurt you. Like, I'm going to clean up, and then we can talk about this. And, like, basically be just gentle parenting Madeline, who's obviously more, I think she's scared, obviously, but she's also, like, shocked, too. She's like, you're a vampire? Like, that's explaining a lot right now. So Claudia is just kind of being very soothing, very gentle. It's just like, we will talk about this. Like, it'll be fine. No, don't worry about it. I'm chill. I'll clean up your place, and then we can have a little chitty chat about this whole vampire situation. But I just want to say the score during this part where Claudia is like being very soothing and very calming, and you can definitely see the ties. I wouldn't say it's like an exact match, but you can see the parallels to when Lestat is turning Louis, and the apprehension from Louis is kind of the same from Madeline, and it's this very gothic romantic moment, and they're kind of one and the same, those scenes are. But the score during the scene, Daniel Hart, I just need to take a breather because this whole season scores, from the jazzy noir score of episode 2 to the really haunting kind of like one note monotonous like horror movie style score of last episode, to this just really gentle yet like it's got some gravity to its score that was playing during the scene with Madeline and Claudia. It was absolutely just brilliant stuff, heart-wrenching and beautiful all at the same time. I loved it. Yuri forever. We have a quick little jaunt where we see Louis going to talk to Armand at the theater, and Louis has a big painting, and he's showing Armand like, oh, basically like, I'm gonna flip this painting and get all this money, and do this and do that. I'm gonna invest it, like I might buy a plane. Like, Louis is a man with a plan. This is very much so shades of Pimp Louis at this point. And he's serious about this. Like, he no longer wants to be the artist. He wants to be the dealer. He wants to be selling the pieces, flipping for profits. No wonder they're into crypto in the modern age, in 2022 in Dubai. But Armand, while Louis telling him this, he's just like, oh, like, the first vampire capitalist, the first vampire pilot, haha, like he's like ribbing him a little bit. And then it's just like, take off your clothes. And I was like, be a lady. Be a lady, Louis. Oh my God. And let me see, hold on. Let me see what the actual quote was, because I wrote it down, but I was flabbergasted, shocked even. But he was just like, take off your clothes. And Armand is like, oh, I need to read through this line. And he was just like, have you like face down in the coffin. You can read while I like fuck you. I was like, oh my God, time and place.
It's like, no big deal. Like sucking dick and cock. Like, I'm just like, oh my God, time and place.
These people are conspiring to kill you, Louis, and you out here just be a lady. Armand and Louis haven't been very intimate, especially in the way that Lestat and Louis were in season 1. Like, Louis and Lestat were butt naked on the beach, episode 1, 20 minutes in. You know what I mean? But Armand and Louis really haven't done that. And you can tell that they're trying to kind of weave a web of intimacy being a bit of a weird gray area for Louis and Armand. I think to a certain degree there is obviously some reasons why maybe intimacy wise they may not do it often. But then also too, like, the whole idea of Louis being on the rebound, like, I think he is like, he wants it when he wants it, and he may not have like super wanted it before from Armand, because we have seen Louis be intimate with Dreamsat, who ended up being another guy, but like, we've seen him be intimate with Dreamsat, but not necessarily Armand. So I think there's definitely a narrative purpose as to why we are not seeing them in the same kind of sexual light that we see Lestat and Louis. That just shows the differences between those two dynamics. And it's really, I'm not going to tell you how to feel about that one way or the other. I'm just saying that I think the purpose of them being seen as less intimate as Lestat and Louis is purposeful in the narrative. So go forth with whatever interpretation you have from that, but that's just my general reading of it all. But yeah, I was like, oh my God, Louis, be a lady. Be mindful of why you were invited into the section. You know what I'm saying? Like, I was like, whoa. So we cut back to Claudia and Madeline talking, and Claudia had Madeline basically read her journals from when she was turned. I think is reading Claudia's journal from right when she was turned. So like her happier years with Lestat and Louis, and basically when she was still like a teenager and learning to be a vampire, and how like fun and thrilling it was, and basically the events of episode 4, which are, I've talked about episode 4 before. It's probably one of, if not my favorite episode from season 1. I really love it. You could just see how happy they all were, even though there were still obviously tensions between Lestat and Louis, and Lestat and Claudia. It's always Lestat. He's always at the center of some drama. For all intents and purposes, a happy family. And we have not seen that literally since that episode. So it's funny, or not funny, but it's sweet that Claudia is showing Madeline ostensibly a time when she was like the happiest in her vampiric life, like to explain what this whole shebang is about. The book that Claudia is reading while Madeline's reading her journals is How to Make Friends and Influence People, which, if you don't know what that book is, it's like a self-help book that a lot of like businessmen use and stuff. And I think it's the book that like introduced the idea of when you're talking to someone, like when you first meet them, the way to make them be more drawn to you and attracted to you is like for you to repeat their name back to them. So if I'm like meeting someone named Sarah, I say like, hi Sarah, and like, nice to meet you, like using their names a lot, like the favorite word of any human is their name, that type of thing. So I just thought it was very funny, especially for where this is going, with Claudia wanting Madeline to become a companion of hers. It's funny that Claudia is reading how to make friends and influence people, because I feel like she was reading it to convince and influence Armand or Louis to turn Madeline. So they're talking, and Madeline asks Claudia, you know, what does it feel like to drink blood? And Claudia's just like, I mean, you've bit your lip before, like, girl, you know. And she's just basically saying like, you know, like, no, like, does it feel like drinking life itself and everything? And then she offers Claudia to drink from her, and then Louis comes in and it's just like, you know, once she starts, she won't stop. And Louis like, he's like pissed, like he's angry when he's walking in, and he's just like, you know, is this, you know, her, like, is this the companion? And Madeline is not afraid to speak up and just be like, yes, I'm the forbidden friend and everything. And Louis upset with Claudia because he's just like, you know, you've invited her into our space. You told her you were a vampire. Like, she's in my coffin. Like, he's very much so upset. And in that, and I get why he's upset. I understand why he is upset. He's already feeling like he's under this magnifying lens from Armand to a certain degree, from the coven, etc., etc., etc. I get it. In this moment, Louise says, I'd like a couple of months where you don't tear things down or fuck things up. And all I said was, ditto, Louis, ditto. If that ain't the pot calling the kettle black, Louis, Louis, not tearing things down or fucking things up. But again, like I said, get out of the comments section for a second. Look at me. I understand why he's upset. Okay, but that doesn't negate him. The sweet irony of him specifically saying that to Claudia, found it very funny. But basically, Claudia is not getting upset with him. She's not, you know, yelling or anything like that. She's just basically like, hey, I've been a third all of my life. You know, I was around when you were Lestat's, and now you're Armand. And then now here goes Louis wanting to argue semantics, or Armand is mine. And Claudia's just like, okay, well, that's certainly one way to look at it. You know, Louis, however you need to work that out in your mind, Diva, like, you go forth and do that. You know what I'm saying? Like, if I tell you about yourself, you're going to be mad. You're going to be mad at me. But me and Claudia and literally everybody else knows that, like, you're Armand's. You're Armand's. Just because he calls you Matra every once in a while, and, you know, it's all hot and sexy and you get all hot and bothered by it, you're not really the one calling the shots fully. Okay, that's Armand's. So when she said you're Lestat's and now you're Armand's, she said what she said. You know what I mean? But that's besides the point. But she reasons with him and tells him, you know, like, hey, like, you had a companion this whole time. I have never had that. Like, I want this one decision that I make to be for me, and she's the one decision that I get to make in this life. You know, I didn't ask to be a vampire. I didn't ask to be turned. You know, I didn't ask for a lot of these things, but this is my moment where I'm asking you, you know, let us be together. You know, let her be my companion. And so Louise basically just like, you know, well, I'm not strong enough and I've never done it before. And Claudia is basically probing him, not necessarily for him to turn her, but for him to ask Armand if he can do that. And Louis does. I think he is seeing in real time with Claudia that she's very serious about this. This is what she needs. I think, you know, I was talking about it with a friend after the episode, and I think Louis has always tried his best to give Claudia what he thinks she wants or needs or what would make her happy. I don't think he's ever been fully honest with himself that the thing that she needs or the thing that would make her happy, he can never give her. You know, his presence in her life is never going to fulfill her in the way that she wants to be fulfilled. You know, like, he's always had companions in his vampire life. Claudia's never had one. Be it he's gone through a lot with said companions. And personally, I don't think he needs no companions right now. The companion he needs is therapy. But he doesn't really know a life or an experience in his vampirehood where he doesn't have someone else. Claudia doesn't quite have that. She's like, I've been a third my whole life. Like, it's been you and someone else, and then there's me. I want someone for my own. I want someone who understands me and gets me. And you can see this just really tender, beautiful thing that's happening between them where they are both like 10 toes down committed. They want to spend eternity together. Because when you find someone who truly gets you in your entirety, like they have both bared their souls and exposed what they feel is the darkest parts of them, and that other person doesn't run away or doesn't judge. So Madeline, with the reputation that she has within Paris and how people treat her, and then Claudia with her being a vampire. Like, those are two things that have ostracized them from a greater public in a way. But the other doesn't hear it and want to run away too. They embrace them. And so when they found that in each other, and they're just like, this is it. This is who I want to be with. This is everything that I've always wanted. And you can really tell in that moment that is what both of them, Claudia and Madeline, are experiencing with each other. And it's just a gorgeous, gorgeous scene. That a little bit too, I think, a part of Louise's frustrations, in addition to kind of how Claudia went about it, I think is the fact that she found this relationship in a human. I think that bothers him to a certain degree too, because Louis, all that he's ever wanted was to be heard and be listened to and really understood. And Claudia has found that in a human. And Louis doesn't find that until the 70s with Daniel. But at the time, he was upset that he can't live his life. Like, he was upset that his photography suffered because he could never get close to his subjects because he would want to kill him. But I think he's a little bit envious of how Claudia has been able to find that connection with a human. And I think he's a little bit upset too that the human wants to become a vampire, because he's like, no, run away. Like, don't. If I could choose to not be a vampire, I would not. Like, don't do this to yourself, type of thing. And I think that's a little bit, I think a lot of it is him wanting to protect Claudia. But I think a little bit is that tiny little bit that's a bit envious of how Claudia was able to find a human to have this connection with. And then that human wants to become a vampire and get out while you can, type of thing. So Louis obliges Claudia and goes to ask Armand. And he is basically kind of sweetening up Armand. And it's just like imagine, you think life is great with me right now, but imagine, me without the burden of her being Claudia. Like, if Claudia's out doing her own thing and has her own companion, she's out of the picture. Like, then it's just, you've got me all to yourself. And in the moment, I knew immediately, okay, he's saying that to encourage Armand, because ultimately that's what Armand wants at the end of the day. He wants Louis all to himself. And he's never been able to have that because Claudia's in the picture. So Louis said it to kind of sweeten up the deal. And Claudia kind of calls him out a little bit later in the scene. It's just like, did you mean that? And he's like, does it matter? It got the result. But there's a little bit that you're just like, maybe you meant that a little bit. Like maybe it's time for us to separate. Maybe this is the moment when it happens. So Armand goes and he's basically kind of grilling Madeline, and it's just like, how will you feed, and ask her all these questions. And basically he's trying to intimidate her, and Madeline's not having it. Like, she's very much a one-to-one. She's like, I want to be with her, and this is how I'm going to do it. Like, I want to be with Claudia. And Armand is trying to be like, what's going to happen when she eventually throws herself into the fire and, leaves you and everything. Like, how will you survive? He also asked her, like, how will you survive eternity? And she's like, look around me. Like, the other week, the Gestapo came and killed this guy, my across the street neighbor. This woman who I knew had super chic clothes, she basically died of starvation. Like, I have always figured it out. I've always endured. I've always survived, pretty much. Like, what is immortality at this point? What is vampirism going to do to stop me? And then he's just like, what will you do when Claudia throws herself into the fire? And she's like, maybe she won't do it. Maybe I'm what she needs. And in that moment, I think that was when Armand was envious of what Claudia and Madeline have. Like, both Louis and Armand are seeing this dynamic that Claudia and Madeline have, and I think want it so bad, but know that it can't be recreated in their dynamic. It's the thing that I was talking about last week, where I was saying that Louis and Armand have needs that the other can't meet. And this is a relationship where Claudia and Madeline's needs are being met. And I think they see that and they're just like, dang, like, I want that, like I would want to be in a situation like that, where I have someone who is so 10 toes down for me, walking to the ends of the earth for me, and would do it, no questions asked. Like, I think they're both seeing two sides of this relationship, and they're feeling a little bit envious because they want that for themselves. During this whole thing, Louis and Claudia are outside. Like, Armand takes Madeline into a separate room and is basically interrogating her. And while they're doing that, that's when Claudia asks, like, oh, did you mean it when you said without the burden of me and everything? And he's just doesn't tell her no. He's just like, does it matter if I meant it or not? Like, we're getting the job done. And she's just like, whatever. And I think a little bit of that hurt her, because she's just like, ugh. But, if that's how he feels, that's how he feels. And then they're talking, and Claudia's just like, you seem stronger. And he's like, I am. And she's like, well, you got to give something to get something. And I think he's thinking, oh, I'm stronger because I'm the matre of this relationship. Like, I'm in charge. And she's like, you've given something up, which is kind of your freedom in a way. Like, you don't have as much autonomy in this dynamic as you think you do. It's the illusion of control that Louis has right now. And he kind of like ponders and sits with that for a little bit. Oh yeah. So when after Louis asks Armand and is trying to convince him, Armand gets upset with Claudia, and he then spouts, "You are a manipulator, Claudia de Leoncourt." And in that moment, Louis does what I've been wanting him to do, which is he says no. Basically to be like, all right, chill out. Like, this is not her being like Lestat. This is different. Don't treat her like that. That's what I'm talking about. That's what I've been wanting you to do, Louis. This whole time, that's all I've been wanting you to do, is tell your boyfriend to chill out, Chill out like a little bit. But when any mention of tying Claudia to Lestat, Louis shuts it down. And it's just like, no, she's not like him in any regard. Because I think in turn that hurts him too, like, he doesn't want to see any of Lestat in Claudia. He doesn't want to tie them together in any way, because I think it would just be too painful. Through it all, Armand says no. Like, he decides not to turn Madeline, and it makes Louis, in present day, he's just like, he said no. Like, he gave me the illusion of power that he would say yes. And when Claudia and Louis were talking, Louis kept telling Claudia, he's gonna turn her. He's gonna turn her. Like, don't sweat it. He's gonna turn her. He's gonna turn her. Like, he's gonna agree. It'll be fine. You're nervous for nothing. Like, I don't know if you know this, but like, I'm the dom of this situation, and I said that he needs to turn her, so he will, because I said so. And then Armand doesn't. And then Armand does not. Yeah. So then we cut to Dubai, and Daniel's just like, oh, matre in the bedroom, matre when it's hot and convenient. And Louis was like, that is how it felt. Like, I had the illusion of power and control. I didn't have none of that. Armand was just playing the game. he let me be Mothra when it wasn't that big of a deal. But when it came to things that I really needed, like, turning Madeline for Claudia, he didn't want to. And then it comes out that Armand has never turned anyone before. And he doesn't like it. He thinks the act of turning humans into vampires is repulsive. He's never done it. And so Louis is like, oh, you never told me that, blah, blah, blah. And Armand's like, yes, I did tell you that. But Daniel is just like, you were the leader of a coven for 200 years. You are a 500-year-old vampire. You've never turned anyone. And that's when Armand is like, no, it repulses me. I don't like it. And the crazy thing is, in theory, Louis and Armand feel kind of the same way about turning humans. Like, they don't like it. They don't want to do it. They have no interest in it. And yet they feel just so misaligned. And I think if it was anyone but Claudia, Louis would be, be understanding of where Armand's coming from. But they're so misaligned on the whole idea of turning when they feel kind of the same way. They don't feel like anyone should become a vampire, because I think they're both drowning in sorrow and misery in their vampirehood, and that is a sentence that lasts for eternity. So they both feel trapped in that way, and they deal with it by Louis kind of going inwards towards himself, and then Armand deals with it by trapping others. Like, they deal with it in two very different ways, but they both feel the same about it, ostensibly. And after that, Louis basically says that he's upset because Armand went in there knowing he wasn't going to do it. He gave Louis the illusion that, Louis was, as the Mothra, was like making him. And he was just like, you went in there, it was disingenuous. You knew you weren't going to do it from the jump. And yet you kind of played in my face and you played in Claudia's face. And Armand was just like, oh, well, that's your opinion. And Louis is like, no, that was Claudia's opinion. Like, you knew you weren't going to do it anyways. Why did you pretend like you were going to? You know what I mean? And it was just like, it's got a point. So then after that, we cut to another rehearsal at the Théâtre des Vampires. And basically Armand and Santiago and Sam kind of get into it. And it's essentially like a staged fight. Like, it's not real. And I think it was meant to kind of give the illusion of sowing seeds of like dissension within the coven, arming Armand for making it seem like they're all working in cahoots with each other, which he knows that they are, but they had to make it kind of seem like, oh, like they're at each other's throats and they need Armand to come in and be the leader of the coven, and like, nothing is happening underneath the surface. But then telepathically, it was Santiago and Sam who were getting into it, and then Santiago's just like, oh, Sam, I didn't mean that, I love your work, and basically Santiago was doing that to give Armand the illusion that he could come in and still has a place in the coven, and that they are just helpless sheep who still do need him to guide them in a certain way. But before that, Armand and Louis tell Daniel that throughout this time, there have been strange sightings of different crimes that were happening. And basically, the coven, throughout the night, they stole a telescope and color film, and basically were seen muttering something in unison off of the side of the Eiffel Tower. And so essentially, something is brewing with the coven. They're doing something. We don't exactly, we do know what it's going to lead to, but like, they're actively, like, they're at work building up this trial that we see at the end of the episode. Like, they're putting in the work for it. And so that scene kind of ends, and they had that fight, and it wasn't really a fight. It was just kind of like a ruse. So then we see Louis and Armand, and they're at the park, and Louis is not satisfied with Armand's reasoning for not turning Madeline. Like, he's just like, I'm not satisfied with that. Like, why wouldn't you do it? And Armand is just like, basically, when you turn someone else, they can grow to despise you. And like, both Louis and Armand could say that very thing of like, oh, I don't want to become a maker because I don't want my fledgling to resent me and hate me like I hate my maker. And I think both of them, their hesitation, resentment towards becoming makers is because their makers were so terrible that they don't want to have that in common with their makers. They don't want to have the shared burden slash responsibility of being a maker to someone else. They don't want to make the same mistakes that their makers made with them and the ways that their makers failed them. I think it comes from a sincere place. Like they want to seem like they want to basically not be what their makers were. And you don't know. It's like the thing of becoming a parent. You don't know what mistakes you'll make as a parent with your kid. And I think they're kind of approaching it from the same angle. They're both just like, no, don't want to do it. I don't want my fledgling to grow to despise me. But essentially, this whole conversation is for Louis to say to Armand, I'm going to turn Madeline for Claudia. Like, she doesn't have too many options, and we got to do this. And Armand is just like, well, Claudia said that she didn't want Lestat's blood to be used to turn Madeline. And Louis is just like, she doesn't have many options. She wants to do this, so we got to do it. And Louis invites Armand to see it. And he's just like, maybe we can bring one in a good way. Because for them, both of their turnings from being a human to a vampire were a bit full of a little bit of trauma. A little bit of trauma was associated with it. And they were both put in a position to where they feel like they lost their human life in the way that they weren't ready to. Like when Louise screams at Lestat in season 1, it's just like, you took my life. Like, they both have that feeling of their humanity was theirs and it was taken from them. So Louis is just like, maybe this can be good for us to see a vampire being born in a non-traumatic way. It's peaceful, it's calm. She wants this. She's inviting this. Like, maybe this will be good for you to see. And Armand is just like, are you asking me or are you making me? And Louis kind of backs off. The reading is that when Armand asks that, Louis kind of backs off, and it's just like, okay, you just really don't want to see it. It's fine. And you can see the look on Armand's face where he's just like, and then he just says like, I'm sorry. And Louis is like, no, it's okay. Just make sure we're not disturbed. That's what you can do in this regard. Just make sure we're not disturbed. So then we get to what I think is the most beautiful scene in the episode, which is Madeline turning. It was so gorgeous, both in how it was shot and in the dialogue. One of my favorite lines is Madeline saying to Claudia, don't worry about the blood. It was the blood that made you. Because Claudia was the reason why she didn't initially ask Louis to turn Madeline is because she didn't want Lestat's blood to be used to turn Madeline. And, Louis was just like, oh, it was good enough for us. But then Claudia comes back and it's just like, yeah, but it's not good enough for her. I want better for her. And so in this scene, Madeline reassuring her of this decision and being like, like, don't worry about the blood. It was the blood that made you. And you are great. And I love you. Like, just as much as the blood came from someone who might have been bad or might not have been the best, it also was the blood that made you. You were not your maker, pretty much. And I think in a weird way, both Louis and Claudia need to hear that. Like, they needed to hear someone say, like, you are not your maker. You are not doomed to be your maker. And yeah, I just thought it was just beautiful. I'm gonna cry. So then we get into it. Louis bites Madeline, and in that he can see a lot of her memories. So we see that she had a sister who died, and she had parents who also died, and we see the her having her hair cut by other French people as a part of the whole like horizontal collaboration thing. Like, I think when I was looking it up, the women who were involved had their heads shaved in order to kind of signal to the public that these were these types of women's, basically giving the public signal to harass them. And Louis was like, through all of that strife and all of that tragedy and all of that rage, I then see this vision of Claudia.
I saw Claudia in an impossible afternoon light she could never survive in. Claudia, as Madeline perceived her, resplendent, rendered even more beautiful by her beholder. And I knew then, with all certainty, she would be a better companion to Claudia than I ever had.
And that's Louis finally letting go. He's like, okay, it's done now. Like, the best thing I can do for her is allow for them to be together. I can't give her anything that would really super fulfill her, but this will fulfill her. And so Claudia then joins in, and she's kind of overwhelmed by the hunger, and they're both feeding on Madeline, and Madeline is turned. And then we see Louis afterwards, and he's by himself, and he goes and he's just like really upset. And Armand comes and it's just like, what happened? And Louis he's got a gash in his arm. And he was just like, I was trying to throw up her blood. He basically is like, I don't want to be a maker. And it's the thing of what I was just talking about, where it's just like the burden of becoming a maker and feeling the sense of now responsibility for this person. Like, he's like, I can feel her. I didn't feel anything for when Claudia left. I thought I would be kind of distraught, but I don't feel anything. Like, I didn't care. And he feels a bit, what's the word I'm looking for? Just like a bit, I wouldn't say angry, but he's just like, like, I did not care. Like, he's just removed. He's dejected from this whole experience. And Armand's like, give it time. Like, you guys have a bond that will kind of endure forever. You'll reconnect again one day. And talking about Claudia, basically just being like, you feel this way now and you're upset now that she's gone, and essentially you feel like she doesn't need you anymore, but you're always going to have this connection with one another. Like, it's always going to be there. You'll connect again. And so then that directs Louis' attention to Armand, who brought in a bag, like a suitcase. He's just like, what's that? And Armand's like, oh, some clothes and, some stuff. And basically, Armand gives the illusion, or gives the idea, that he has broken with the coven. He's broken away. And then Armand says, I was given a choice. And what he's trying to insinuate is that, like, I left to go and be with you and do all these things with you, and I did this for us. But he doesn't say what that choice fully entailed. They didn't just let him leave and it's just chilled now, like everything is hunky-dory. They let him go, but there were some conditions that went along with it, and we find out what those conditions are very, very soon. So then we get to present day, and Louis is just like, he told me that he broke with the coven. Like, that's what he told me, but that wasn't really the case. And Louis is trying to, basically be like, oh, was this more tampering with my memories? Like, everything, like yada, yada, yodel. And Armand is just like, hey, basically, you asked me to wipe your memories. So I don't know why you're getting all bent out of shape. And Louis is like, no, I didn't. And he's like, yeah, you did. 3 days after San Francisco, you asked me to wipe your memories of you going into the sun and all of this stuff happening. You asked me to do that. And he was like, I had one act of cowardice, and Louis forgave me. But the whole factor that Armand isn't considering in this is Daniel. Daniel's like, well, okay, he may have forgiven you, but I didn't. You wiped my memories too. And Armand is just like, well, you seem fine. Like, that's really like the attitude that he takes. He's just like, well, you seem okay. Like, sorry, but you seem fine. But I'm sorry for wiping your memories and torturing you. Ugh, like that's the vibe that his apology gave. But Daniel, throughout this whole thing, when Louis is talking to Armand, and Armand's just like, like, you asked me to do it. Like, Louis bends immediately. Like, he's back in with Armand. They've basically reconciled. And Daniel is just like, ugh, like, you gotta be kidding me. That's all it took? A half-ass, like, apology, kind of, is all it took for you to be back on his side? Like, are you kidding me? We had a deal. We had an alliance. We were in this together against him, and you're already back with him. Great. And throughout this whole thing, Armand is just like, he pulls Louis into the whole fold too. And it's just like, he thought it would be a good idea to wipe your memories too. So you're mad at me for wiping your memories, but you should be mad at Louis for thinking it was a good idea. Checkmate. Like, he's actively trying to divide Daniel and Louis. When they were standing as a united front after they had unionized briefly in episode 5, Armand was like, oh, these two cannot be in cahoots together. That's just not going to work. So Armand saying, oh, yeah, by the way, Daniel, Louis thought it was a good idea to wipe your memories, just so you know. Like, it wasn't just me acting alone. Louis thought it was a good idea too. That's him actively trying to put a wedge in between Louis and Daniel so that one can't really trust the other at that point. Because Daniel's like, I didn't ask for my memories to be wiped. If Armand puts responsibility on him and Louis, that's going to have Daniel looking at Louis in a bit of a different light. That's what Armand is trying to do. He's trying to shove them apart. So then we get to one of the last scenes in the episode, where it's Louis, Armand, Claudia, and Madeline, and they're having like dinner. They're having a nice little family dinner. Claudia and Madeline went away. Like, Louis told them to get far away, and apparently they came back, I guess, to say goodbye, and they were having a good time. And Madeline is just like, like, oh, I could feel Claudia's love for you, Louis. Like, that's why I said we should come back and, say goodbye properly and all this stuff. And then he being like, I can feel his love too. Like, I can feel you through him talking to Armand. He's just like, Louis loves you. And Louis is just like, not saying, yeah, he's just like, oh, like, don't tell him that. Like, that's going to give him a big head and yada, yada, yada. Like, he's not being like, yeah, I love him. Like, he's just like, like, oh my gosh, like, quit gassing him, everything like that. So throughout this whole thing, there were also a lot of times during this dinner scene too, where Claudia, now that she's, happy, and I think she's got a little bit of clarity, so to speak, and she's with her beloved and being able to really truly be happy, she's doing a lot of apologizing and thanking to Armand. She's like, thank you for always treating me like an adult. I'm sorry that the coven was difficult on you. Yeah, things weren't super great when we were in it, but now that we're out of it, it's all good now. Things are not all good, because then Armand, he gets up and he walks away, and then we see the camera kind of follow him, and he has basically stopped space and time, that little gift that he has. And who do we see coming up with some burlap sacks? Santiago and the coven. They kidnap Claudia, Madeline, and Louis. And now we're into the trial. And the final scene of the episode is the trial beginning, basically. And who other comes back for the trial than one not dead Lestat de Leoncourt. Lestat is alive. We knew this. And then that's the end of the episode. In the next song, we see that we're going to be in the trial, and it's for the attempted murder of Lestat and Antoinette and all these things. These are the things that they're being tried on and everything. And I made a little joke, because I was just like, some of those charges against Claudia and Louis should be dropped, because they were like, oh, you murdered Lestat, you murdered Lestat. Lestat is right there. He is right there and seems to be fine. Yeah, attempted murder. It wasn't a successful attempt, was it? So, checkmate. I know that they're being tried for attempted murder, which is so funny, because the vampire law says you should not kill another vampire. They technically did not kill that vampire. So let's lessen the charge a little bit. But yeah, but that's the end of the episode. So the whole choice that Armand basically made was to lead the coven to Louis, Claudia, and Madeline, allow them to be captured. And also, I think too, Armand must have led the coven to Lestat, or led Lestat to the coven. Like, he either knew where he was this whole time or was able to reach out to him. Either way, I don't know. But they would have had no idea how to get to Lestat otherwise. Like, they were going to the Roger guy and trying to be like, when was the last time you talked to him? Like, they were going that route. The one person, as we've seen in episode 5, who could get to Lestat, like, he could reach out with his, brain FaceTime and find out where he was Armand. Armand is powerful enough to do that. So basically, I feel like Armand is in cahoots with the coven to get Claudia, Louis, and Madeline killed, to get all of them at least on trial that would eventually lead to their death. That was Armand's one act of cowardice. Like, he basically, in exchange for his freedom, he basically is helping the coven in capturing them. And that's the episode. This episode was very much so a we've been doing this, like, kind of going up and up and up and up and up. This is the little scoop before the big hill, on a roller coaster. Like, I will say, this was not an episode where, like, oh, nothing happened, because that's not true. I feel like a lot of things did occur, but it wasn't as flashy of an episode. And the thing is, you need an episode like this, because episode 4 and 5 had a lot going on in them, especially emotionally with episode 5. And then episode 7 and 8 are the end of the series. So that's when they're firing on all cylinders. You kind of need that little bit of a dip to get us to the final hill. Like, it's a moment of breathing, kind of. It's like okay, like, things are still brewing, like the water is slowly rolling up to a boil, but you kind of need that little moment of quiet before the storm. Incredibly well done episode. I thought, I think her name is Roxanne, who plays Madeline. Thought her performance was brilliant. She was my favorite part of the episode, because she was able to be really just tender and loving and earnest with Claudia, but also incredibly fearless. Like, she did not fear Armand's ass at all. He's old as dirt, and she's just like, I'm in this for Claudia, okay? That's all I'm in it for. I will become a vampire for her. I'll figure that all out for her. That's why I'm here. That's why I'm doing this. She's got resolve. She's a fighter, okay? But this episode was, number one, I think was great that we got more of Claudia and Madeline, and we're able to see that dynamic with them. It's going to be short-lived, but I was happy that we got a majority them episode to get us into the rest of the season. But this episode was incredibly necessary. It may not have been episode 5 or episode 7, the craziness that's going to be that. It's kind of similar to the idea that you see in a lot of Studio Ghibli films, where how Miyazaki has talked about having moments of ma. It's like the idea of having a moment for the audience to kind of sit with all of the things that they've just processed. So any scene in a Ghibli film where you're seeming like, oh, nothing's happening, everything's quiet, they may show like a field or just a lot of like still shots, and with beautiful, Joe Hisashi like score underneath it. The purpose of those scenes in those films are to allow you to sit with everything that's happened before you get into the final bit of the story. Rest with what you've experienced and process what you've experienced in order to push through. Every TV show has an episode right before the big finale where things are crazy and like where things have to be a little bit quiet before they can get loud again. Like it's a crescendo. That's how this has to operate. So I thought this episode was really great. I think you need a little bit of a calm down episode, especially in a season that only has 8 episodes. Like if you're just going full throttle, the meaningfulness of every single episode is not going to be felt as much if you don't have a difference in tempo type of thing. So I think it was great for that. My one little critique, and it's mainly a critique of the full season, and it's not really even like a full critique. I think that the reveal of Lestat would have been that much more of a pow had we not seen as much of Dreamstat as we did. They were incredibly necessary, especially for Louise' part of the narrative. Like, you need to have Dreamstat there. But I think if we would have gotten less of Dreamstat, not to say eradicate him, but just a little bit less, because he's basically in every single episode. If we would have gotten 1 to 2 Dreamstat episodes, so like in the first one and maybe in episode 4 or something like that, then the reveal of real Stat would have been that much more punchy. One to grow on. It's not that big of a deal, because ultimately I think people will be surprised with Lestat anyways, but I was just thinking like, oh, like that could have really been like a super big like wow reveal had we not seen as much of Dreamstat. Of course, Dreamstat and real Lestat aren't the same. It's still the presence you're seeing, like they look the same. So I think if it would have been that was like the first time or one of the first times we had seen him, it would have been that much more of a punch. But that's just like a taste thing. I don't think that the narrative really suffered at all from that. It still is like a big thing to have Lestat there at the trial. How he got there, we can assume it was probably by Armand, but we don't fully know. I hope you enjoyed this week's episode. I had a lot of fun. Like I said at the beginning of the episode, next week's review, so the review of episode 7 will be up on Tuesday versus next Monday. And then for the finale episode, we'll be back to posting on Mondays. So I'll remind you in the next video, but just wanted to make sure that you knew. Be sure to like and subscribe and comment and do all that fun stuff. We're gearing up for some of the 2 best episodes of television ever made. So I am scared, but I'm also very excited because the show, I think episode 5 was a turning point. Like this was a moment. Like the attention is turning to the show in a major way. And I think it's just in time for the finale. So it's going to be really exciting. As always, I'm Bobby. This is Culture Kitsch. I don't have an outro yet, but I'll see you next week on Tuesday.